I'm a video game nerd. I have been to the National Video Game Museum. Thank you very much. Thank you. It is in Texas. If you would like to go, it's in the Metroplex, DFW Metroplex down there. You can go waste $30 and walk through this museum if you'd like. It is the National Video Game Museum. It is awesome for nerds. But anyway, I love video games. I like the old arcades a lot better than new games. So I like new games too, but I really like the old games. I love like Pac-Man and Frogger, Akari Warriors. I played a lot of these games in my youth, and so I love the arcade cabinet, that kind of game. Pac-Man was always so frustrating for me though, and I noticed a big shift. I'm in that generation, so I am in the generation that started analog and made the digital transition. But in the video game world, we saw another transition happen, and that is the shift from arcades where the games were trying to get you to put more quarters in. So your gameplay is quick and fast, and if you're not really memorizing the patterns on these old games, you die very quickly, and you have to put another quarter in to continue. And you're just feeding the machine, hence it's a good business. Now, that changed when the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, what's called the NES, the very first real widely distributed. There were Atari and all those, but ColecoVision. You want to hear more? No? Okay. So the NES was the first really widespread one, right, that was taking, like if you look at some of the arcade games, they were vastly superior to what you could get on the Atari. Like it wouldn't even look the same. If you look at the Atari's version of Pac-Man, it's disgusting. It will make you just get sick. But the versions that came to the NES were very similar to the arcade. Not quite as good, but boy, a lot closer. But something happened there that hadn't happened before, and that is that you could pause and you could change the way the game was going. And they added this really cool element, the extra life. Rocked my world. You don't got to put a quarter in. You can keep going from where you're at. You can get a one up. They would say one up, one more life. Yeah. And then if you had the cheat codes, up, down, left, right, never mind. But if you had the cheat codes, there were books. I would go to the book fair at school, and I would be like, oh yeah, Alexander Graham Bell, wonderful, Lincoln, the video game guide, that's the one I need. It's got all the cheat codes in it. So they didn't have the internet. So we had these books just full of these cheat codes, and you enter it in the game, and it would give you 99 lives. 99 lives for free. For me, it was just like, that was awesome. And part of the struggle is you had lived in a world so long where you just expected, because parents would give you like $1 and be like, don't spend it all in one place. And you're like, that's 5 seconds on this game. I'm going to die so quickly. $1's not going to last that long. And so I would be so frustrated. And then this came out, and it was like the most mind-blowing news I'd ever heard. Death was defeated. Death was done. I had 99 lives, and if I couldn't get it right 99 times, then I probably needed to practice a lot more. But this is what's funny to me is this has been the core message of Christianity for a long time. Like, there's a lot of things today in the media about Christianity, and even growing up, it's so funny to watch, being old now, looking back over the course of my life from when I was 14, when I started really being involved in church, to now at 45, and just seeing the different cultural battles that have been fought and where kind of culture thinks Christianity is and what it thinks is most important. But the core underlying thing that's actually the bread and butter of what we're talking about, resurrection, that's not changed at all. That, in fact, unites us. It's right there in the creed. It's one of those uniting things. We get so interested and we get so attention-driven by these other topics, but we forget that the biggest thing to ever happen is the resurrection of Jesus. And it is that thing that unifies, and it is that thing that brings us together. So it's not a new phone, it's not a new technology, it's not winning a lottery ticket, it's death itself being defeated. That Jesus rose from the dead. This is the most epic, sweeping, good news in the world. That the resurrection is a game changer because it rewrote literally the rules of life and death. I think in my lifetime, in my job in particular, I've had to go to so many funerals and to be with families and to walk through that pain. And every time you enter that space, I feel the heaviness of the room, and I feel the weight of that. And I remember as a young person, like in my 20s when I was a pastor, and not having a lot of that experience other than families. I mean, most of us don't go to that many funerals. And then, going to, in some of the churches I served, going to one a month or 2 or 3 a month sometimes in the bad months, and having to learn how to process all of that, and having to learn about the finality of life and death and how that works, and this feeling every time, no matter who's telling the stories, whether they were really sweet stories or really silly stories, as those people are talking about those life stories, every time getting this gut feeling something is not right. Goodness, this is just not right. This is just terrible. And I think the room must have been very heavy with the death of Jesus, because these men and women had given their lives, and they dedicated all their time. They'd left jobs, they'd left money, they'd left power to follow Jesus. And they didn't understand that resurrection was coming. And so as they followed to his death, it must have just weighed on them. What have I wasted my life on? What have I done here? Because now Jesus is dead. And that's where we ended last Sunday, and it was a little bit sad because I wanted to have a little bit of a cliffhanger, but then all week I've been like, whoa, just sitting here in the death of Jesus. We just stopped because we wanted to talk this Sunday all about the creed and the creed's line where it talks about resurrection. And so that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look in Luke 24, and this is one of the gospel accounts. And this tells the aftermath of what we stopped at last week. So last week we stopped at crucifixion, the beating. We stopped at Jesus giving up his life on the cross and saying, "It is finished." And that was the final word there. So it is finished. And so then we want to look at Luke 24, beginning verse 1 today, because here we have kind of what comes next, if you will. So it says, very early on Sunday morning, the women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. So they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there, puzzled, 2 men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. Then the men asked, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the 3rd day." And then they remembered. Isn't that interesting? It's at that moment, after they're reminded, then they remembered that he had said this. So they rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and several other women who told the apostles what had happened. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men, so they didn't believe it. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look. Stooping, he peered in and saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. Even when he saw it with his own eyes, he wondered what had happened. It's why I never, ever, ever hold it against someone when they have doubt or they struggle with faith, or they even hear me tell this to them and they go, "I just don't know about that." People with their own eyes seeing it in real time struggled. 2,000 years later, obviously, there's going to be struggle and there's going to be doubt. And that makes sense, and that's real. But the cool part is that's not the end of Peter's story either. Just like death wasn't the end of Jesus' story, Peter going, that's weird. That wasn't the end of the story. And Peter becomes this massive evangelist for telling the good news that Jesus is not in that grave. And then many people began to tell that, and you have 4 written gospel accounts of that, and hundreds of people that were witnesses to this risen Jesus. And that story, in over 2,000 years, hasn't died out. Many, many religious leaders have risen and fallen in that time. Many people claiming to be the Messiah, claiming to be God himself, risen and fallen, risen and fallen, risen and fallen. Cults have become very popular and big, but they've also all crashed and burned. And here you have the creed teaching this central truth. On the third day, Jesus rose again. It was crucial to put this in the creed because there was a lot of discussion on this. There was a lot of people starting to rise up and say, well, maybe he died and maybe I'm the new Jesus. There were people trying to do that. I say, I'm the new Jesus. We have them today still trying to do that. I read about some guy, I think he's in the Netherlands, that's built a little compound there, and I'm the new Jesus. Koresh tried to do it. I mean, there's people all the time going, I'm the new Jesus. And they get a following because people are gullible. And people really, really want to see Jesus. And so they sometimes let reality go by, and they let Jesus' own words go by. They let the fact that he taught us that many false prophets would arise. And the creed said, no. Jesus isn't dead. Jesus is in no grave. Jesus rose again on the third day. There are no resurrected people that can pretend to be him. Jesus is ascended to be with the Father. The creed wanted to establish this for once and for all. And so this is why you have something here in the creed that nearly 3 billion people that are Christians agree on. This is fundamental to who we are. Just as much as the virgin birth, the resurrection is fundamental. It is the foundation. And it actually goes beyond that. The resurrection is, I would argue, the crux of it. And I argue this every Easter, sometimes with good logical reasoning, and sometimes I just say it. But it is the linchpin, if you will. It is the point where death didn't win. Hope bursts forth in our world, brighter than any sunrise. And it is a whisper of victory in the face of what must have felt like very dark times to the people that were there. It must have felt terrible to be there and to witness Jesus being crucified. Now, Jewish historians tell us that less than 20 years after Jesus was crucified, the Jews were expelled from Rome. They were kicked out of Rome. Why? Because there was so much fighting within them over Jesus that they couldn't even keep any of the Jews. They couldn't separate and figure out how to separate it to keep the Jews that were Christians, the Jews that weren't Christians. There was so much turmoil. I'm not talking about 10 people. I'm talking huge amounts of people, so large that they couldn't keep them because there was so much fighting over this. So they were kicked out of Rome. Other historians tell us that 300 years after the crucifixion, 300 years after the Romans executed Jesus, that Rome converted to Christianity. Everyone. Now, we could argue how that's even possible, but they made it their state religion. They went from murdering Christians and trying to stamp them out of history to saying, maybe this Jesus guy had something. You know, the guy we killed, the guy we executed for no reason, he broke no laws, that guy that we treated like a common criminal, he was probably the Son of God. That's never happened in history, ever before or ever again. It leads one to say there's a lot of credibility in this story. You talk about the largest, most powerful, most widespread empire that is like also like Star Wars Empire evil level empire, right? I mean, like terrible, horrible people doing terrible, horrible things to gain more power. And then they have a change of heart and say, were we wrong? I think we were wrong. And so Christianity becomes their official religion. I love what this author said that I read this week. He said, the resurrection of Jesus is the central fact of Christian devotion and the ground of all Christian thinking. Now notice he doesn't say it is a central fact for everyone to that they have to agree to this. But he says it is the central fact of all Christian devotion. It is the reason the church exists. It is the reason Christianity exists. It is the reason Christian thinking has foundation. It is the linchpin of all of it. Either it happened and it's all true, or it didn't and it's all fake. It's all false. There's just not a ton of extra opportunity there because the resurrection is so in your face. It is so critical to all of it. If it happened, it is crucial. If it didn't, it's not at all. But let's go even deeper. The New Testament was written by men and women, put down, written for the very reason that Jesus rose from the dead. They wanted a written record of that and the aftermath of what the resurrection did. It wasn't just to tell the story of Jesus' life before. It wasn't just to tell about his death, but it was to tell about what happened post-death and everything beyond Acts in your New Testament, which is most of the New Testament, is what happened in the early church and how it spread and how it moved and how it grew, even in those early days, how it moved far, far, far beyond Judea, how it moved to Samaria, how it moved to the ends of the earth. Like, this is where it started. Today, 2.5 billion Christians, which is even more now, I think this is 2020 numbers, they worship the Jesus who rose from the dead. While they disagree on many other things, everything from what color the carpet should be to should we have air conditioning to should we sing with instruments or not, we'll fight over anything, but we don't fight over this. This is the key unifying factor, the resurrection of Jesus. A lot of disagreements out there, but not on this. And we exist. There would be no purpose or reason for Coffee Creek Church if Jesus had not risen from the dead. There's no purpose for us to exist. It is the key message that we have. It is key to everything that we do. It is permeating all thoughts, all foundations, all ideology, all speech. It is the unifier. So the creed, in an age before mass media, in an age before TV, in an age before radio, in an age before cell phones, in an age before the internet, there wasn't even electricity. In an age before all of that, the creed was memorized and recited so much to be memorized so that they would have something to unify them. And so they began to be unified around this idea that the message of the resurrection is not only that Jesus survived the crucifixion, but that he transformed even the most powerful empire on earth into something completely different. The story of the resurrection is the story of countless people's lives being transformed throughout history. People leaving and walking away from addiction. People leaving and walking away from persecuting others and hurting others and walking into a new and different way, a way of peace and mercy. Violent men laying down their weapons and saying, I am picking the path of peace. It is people saying, I realize evil had a hold on me. A grip that I wasn't comfortable with, and I could not loose myself from that grip. I could not secure freedom, but Christ secured that freedom for me. This is the history of Christianity. These are the stories over and over again. Countless people having their lives completely turned around because of the good news. Because on the third day, as the creed says, he rose again. Death was not the end of the story. When they went to that tomb, as we read in the scripture, this is what they found: an empty tomb. Now, the critical point for this becomes beyond the linchpin for why the church exists. The critical question becomes, what do you believe about the resurrection? Do you believe that the impossible is possible? Do you believe the written accounts? Do you believe the gospel accounts? Do you believe what these people saw? Does it add credibility that it not only was written in a book a long time ago, written down after oral tradition was passed down, but also that it survived 2,000 years? Does it lend credibility that it converted an entire empire that was very pagan, very evil? Does it lend credibility that for thousands of years upon thousands of years, people have tried to stamp it out? They tried to burn the scrolls. They tried to make it so that the book could never be codified. It wasn't put into a book you have today until the printing press was invented. So it was scrolls before that. And empire after empire grabbed as many of those, burned as many of those, burned as many believers as possible, tried to stamp it out, but it never did. So Could this story, this written account of the empty tomb, change everything for you as it has for countless men and women from every continent, I might add? This is not an American religion by any means. This is not a European religion by any means. Every continent, every culture, every race has been impacted. Could it be that your life could be transformed by this empty tomb? Yale professor, I'm not even going to say it, Pelican? I'm not going to try his first name. This Yale professor wrote this one time. He said, if Christ is not risen, nothing else matters. And if Christ is risen, nothing else matters. If Christ is not risen, nothing else matters, he says. But if Christ is risen, nothing else matters. That's huge. And that weighs on us, and we think about that. But not if we don't take a moment. Our life is so quick now. Like I said, I grew up in this analog era. I grew up on a party line phone. And so you're taking messages, you're writing messages down. Our phone was mounted in the kitchen to the wall. That's where you got on the phone. We had this incredibly long, dangerous cord that you could drag into the living room and stay on the phone with. And then you hang up the phone. And so I grew up in this analog, weird world that's almost like kids are like, was the world in color back then? What was it like back then in your day? And I'm like, yeah, it was different. It was different. We live such fast lives now, and we're involved in such amount of scrolling that sometimes it's hard to just pause for a minute. Sometimes I wish there was a way to just pause. When the AT&T lines went down the other day, I was thinking, you know what? It's probably good for some people. They can't use their device for 5 minutes. It's probably good that this service went down. Sometimes when the internet's down for like 5 minutes, do you ever feel like it's Armageddon? You're like, is everything on fire? I don't know. Yeah. Every time there's an earthquake, I'm like, gotta get on Twitter. Is everybody else seeing this? And everybody's like, did you feel that? And it's like, yeah, thousands of us did. Like, it connects us. It's good, but it's also bad, right? Because we don't pause. The pause button changed my life. You could freeze little Mario there, right in the air. You can go to the bathroom, right? I remember one time I was doing really well at Galaga at this eatery I was at. And I think it was the grease on my hands, and I'd just eaten. I was just killing it. I mean, I was going really further than I'd ever gone before, which is like level 2 probably. But I was just really killing it. And then I just had that moment where he's like, now, I have to go to the bathroom right now. But there's no pause on this thing. And I've put in my quarter. I'm going to lose my money, and I'm never going to be able to enter my name, my initials there. It was a real dilemma. You get home, you got an NES, you got pause functionality. Pause before that button. Pause before the impossible jump. Pause before the stress. Pause if you have something going on in your life, if that phone rings. If mom says, take out the trash. Feed the dog. Pause. What would it be like for you to just pause right now and weigh heavily what you will do with the resurrection? Not what everyone else has done, not what you've seen others do. What will you do with the resurrection? If Jesus said, this is for you, I'm giving my life for you, what does that change for you? And what have you done with that? Because at a certain point, doing nothing with that, like not making a decision, is sort of making a decision, isn't it? It's like, well, I'm just not going to touch it. But in doing that, I'm ignoring it. I'm ignoring this amazing gift that's been given. So what will you do with the resurrection of Jesus? If we're completely honest, it does seem impossible. Like just in our human sense, what we've experienced, what you've experienced in the last decades of your life, it just is outside your experience. But Jesus himself said it this way. He said, humanly speaking, it is impossible. But with God, everything is possible. Jesus looked at them intently, it says. He paused. He wanted them to really soak up this moment. He looks at them and he says, yes, you're right. humanly speaking, these things are impossible. But with God, everything is possible. What would it be like for you to push pause, to consider Jesus, and to embrace the impossible that has the power to change your life?